Christianity's relationship with power. Well, it's been a wild ride for 2,000 years, full of drama, full of contradictions. So let's trace that story, from the shadows of the catacombs right into the corridors of power, to figure out how a persecuted faith didn't just survive, but ended up shaping entire empires.
I mean, think about it. That is a massive reversal. It's almost hard to believe. How do you go from being executed for disloyalty to the emperor to becoming the official religion of that exact same empire? That's the puzzle we're going to try and unpack here. And if you want to see just how big that transformation was, look at these two quotes. At the beginning, you've got the Roman historian Suetonius just brushing off Christians as followers of a wicked superstition. But then you jump forward 1,000 years, and you have Pope Innocent III declaring that he's basically a mediator between God and humanity. Understanding that incredible journey is what this is all about. All right, so let's rewind and start at the very beginning. In the early days of the Roman Empire, Christians weren't just a minority. They were seen as, well, dangerous outsiders. The Romans actually had a word for this, maleficus. And this didn't just mean a different religion. No, it was way heavier. It carried the sense of black magic or a wicked superstition. Christians were seen as antisocial weirdos, maybe even enemies of the whole human race, because they refused to worship the Roman gods, the very gods who were supposed to keep the universe running. And this view of Christians had horrifying, real-world consequences. When a massive fire ripped through Rome in 64 AD, the Emperor Nero needed a scapegoat. And you guessed it, he picked the Christians. The persecution that followed was just sadistic. Believers were literally used as human torches to light up Nero's garden parties. This wasn't just about punishment. It was a terrifying public spectacle. And this right here, this gets to the absolute heart of the conflict. Rome could handle a lot of different religions, but it had one non-negotiable rule: ultimate loyalty to the state. And that was all wrapped up in a single phrase: Caesar is Lord. For Christians, nope, only Jesus was Lord. And that refusal wasn't just a theological disagreement. In the eyes of Rome, it was straight-up political treason. Okay, so if they were considered treasonous outsiders, how on earth did they end up getting a seat at the table? Well, everything changed with one guy, the Emperor Constantine. This is what we call the Great Imperial Turn. And when it happened fast. Just look at this timeline. In 312, right before a make-or-break battle for control of Rome, he supposedly has this vision of a Christian symbol. He slaps it on his soldiers' shields, he wins the battle, and just a year later, the Edict of Milan makes Christianity legal. And get this, by 325, he's not just tolerating Christianity, he's actively managing it, calling the famous Council of Nicaea to get everyone on the same page doctrinally. Now, publicly, this whole shift was handled very, very carefully. The huge arch built to celebrate his victory in Rome as he won by divine inspiration, instinctu divinitatis. It's this beautiful, vague phrase. It doesn't name a specific god, so it doesn't take off the pagan majority, but it definitely points to a higher power, opening the door for his new faith. And let me tell you, with that imperial stamp of approval came some very real, very tangible power and wealth. Suddenly, imperial cash is flowing in to build huge, grand churches. Bishops are handed the legal power to act as judges. The clergy are exempt from taxes. And for the first time, the church can legally own property and land. I mean, talk about a reversal. The persecuted had basically moved into the palace. So this new institutional power just kept on growing. And then, as the Western Roman Empire starts to crumble, it leaves this massive power vacuum in Europe. And guess who steps in to fill it? The Bishop of Rome, the Pope. This is when the church reaches its absolute apex of power. You want to know how big this got? Just listen to this quote from Pope Innocent III, right around the year 1200. He says the Pope is the vicar of Christ, a go-between for God and humanity, below God but beyond man. He judges everyone, but no one judges him. Wow. So you might be wondering, how does a pope actually enforce this kind of authority over, powerful kings with armies?
Well, he had spiritual weapons, but they had very real-world teeth. He could excommunicate someone, which meant cutting them off from the church, and in the medieval mind, basically sentencing them to hell. And if that wasn't enough, there was the interdict. This was the nuclear option, shutting down almost all church services in an entire kingdom until its king caved. And this whole idea was captured perfectly in this famous analogy from, you guessed it, Pope Innocent III. He said the papacy, that's the sun, a source of light and power. And kings, they're just the moon, reflecting that light. Their power wasn't their own. It was borrowed, derived from the much greater spiritual power of the Pope. But as you can imagine, this kind of centralized power couldn't hold forever. Cracks started to appear, and it all blew up with the Protestant Reformation, the moment that just shattered the unity of Western Christianity and blew up the whole power structure. And if you want a taste of just how explosive this was, listen to this declaration from the Holy Roman Emperor about Martin Luther. To the powers that be, this guy wasn't some gentle reformer. He was a devil in a monk's habit who was poisoning the well of Christendom. The battle lines were drawn. So what was the fight really about? Well, it basically boiled down to two completely different views on authority and salvation. On one side, you have the medieval church saying salvation comes from a mixture of faith, good works, and the sacraments, all interpreted by the church and the Pope. On the other side, the reformers are shouting, no, it's by faith alone. And the ultimate authority isn't the Pope, it's the Bible itself, which everyone should be able to read. So, after all this conflict and decades of brutal religious wars, what was the political outcome? It was huge. The Peace of Augsburg in 1555 laid down a whole new principle. Basically, the local prince gets to decide if his territory is Catholic or Lutheran. Essentially, power had shifted. It fragmented away from this one universal church and down to individual national states. Okay, so that brings us all the way to today and to the really complex legacy of this whole story. How does this centuries-long dance between faith and power actually look in our modern world? Well, if you just look at a country like the United States, it's pretty clear you don't see one single unified church anymore. Instead, what you see are the direct results of all those historical fractures. This diverse, sometimes messy landscape of evangelicals, Roman Catholics, mainline Protestants, and more, all living side by side. And the way all these groups can coexist is thanks to a pretty modern idea called the denominational theory of the church. It's basically the idea that no single institution has the full, complete picture of truth. It allows for all this diversity in practice, all while groups might still share some core beliefs. It's a framework that would have been unthinkable in the age of Pope Innocent III. And, these different groups are still wrestling with how to engage with political and social power, often in totally different ways. Just look at the 20th century. You have the social gospel movement, which wanted to use faith to challenge what it saw as sinful social structures like unjust capitalism. And then later, you have the religious right, using political power to push back against cultural changes and defend traditional moral values. So yeah, the debate over how faith should or shouldn't shape society, it is definitely not over. And all of this leaves us with one last big provocative question. After watching this 2,000-year story play out, from persecution to the palace, from unity to fracture, you have to ask, when faith and power get tangled up, which one really ends up transforming the other? Does faith clean up power, or does power always end up corrupting faith? That's the question this long, messy, fascinating history leaves us with.